All right, guys. So a report came out yesterday that we wanted to spend some time taking a look at. This was a UN report that sought to confirm or rebut charges of systematic rape by Hamas on October 7th. Obviously, it's a very fraught topic, one that we've delved into before. Before I jump in, I just want to say, I don't enjoy nitpicking these things, whether there was no rape or some rape or systematic rape or whatever. But the reason we do it is because the atrocities that were committed on that day and the inflation and invention of additional atrocities committed on that day have been a key part of the propaganda effort to justify now Israeli atrocities in Gaza. Now, let me also say, even if all of the beheaded babies and all of the things that were spread were actually true, it still wouldn't justify atrocities in response. But that's the reason why it's important to dig into these things. So in any case, I want to start by setting the context of what this report actually is and what it's not. This is the words of the woman, Pamela Patton, the Secretary General's Special Representative on Sexual Violence and Conflict. She was in charge of putting together this report. This is how she framed what this report actually is. Let's put this up on the screen. She said her trip into Israel to investigate these claims was not intended to be investigative. Other UN agencies have that mandate, she said, but to, quote, give voices to victims and survivors and find ways to offer them support, including justice and accountability. So she says this wasn't intended to be investigative. There are other bodies that have that mandate. In fact, in part of the report, she calls on Israel to allow those bodies to conduct a full investigation, which they have not done. She also called on them to allow a full investigation into allegations of sexual violence directed from Israelis towards Palestinians. Of course, Israel said no to that as well. So in any case, that's to set the stage for what this report actually is and what it is not. In addition, let's go ahead and put the next piece up on the screen. The report contains a boatload of caveats as to the limits of what they were able to ascertain and how much evidence, quote unquote, they were able to gather. So I'm going to read from the report. Bear with me, guys. I want to read from the text so that no one can, so it's not being taken out of context and we can't be accused of this. But I wanted to give you a sense of some of the context here and some of the caveats that were offered. She writes, the national authorities face numerous challenges in the collection of evidence in pursuit of their investigations of the crimes committed during the October 7th attacks, including challenges of coordination and information sharing between governmental agencies, with very specific challenges related to crimes of sexual violence. These included limited survivor and witness testimony, limited forensic evidence due to the large number of casualties and dispersed crime scenes in a context of persistent hostilities, the loss of potentially valuable evidence due to the interventions of some inadequately trained volunteer first responders, the prioritization of rescue operations and the recovery, identification, and burial of the deceased in accordance with religious practices over the collection of forensic evidence. Further, a significant number of the recovered bodies had suffered destructive burn damage, which made the identification of potential crimes of sexual violence impossible. The mission team also faced specific challenges in gathering and verifying information on the occurrence of conflict-related sexual violence. The main challenge was the limited number of and access to survivors and victims of sexual violence and to survivors and witnesses of the October 7th attacks. While the mission team was able to meet with some released hostages, as well as with some survivors and witnesses of the attacks, it did not meet with any survivor or victim of sexual violence from October 7th. So pretty noteworthy here that they are indicating that they were unable to meet with a single actual victim of sexual violence from October 7th. We know from other reporting in the New York Times attempt to report all of this out that they were unable to locate or speak with a single actual victim of October 7th attacks. They talk about the challenges of forensic evidence. There is also no forensic evidence that they were able to use in the production of this report. And so, very limited in terms of the actual data and evidence that they were able to collect. In addition, let's go to the next piece here. So they said, despite concerted efforts encouraging them to come forward, the mission team was made aware of a small number of survivors who are undergoing specialized treatment, still experiencing an overwhelming level of trauma Further, the internal displacement of several communities from the Gaza periphery to other locations, relocation of survivors, and the deployment of October 7th first responders from military forces to combat hindered access to firsthand information. They go on later in the report to add what is maybe one of the most important lines in the report. So as a result of the aforementioned challenges, which are the ones I just described, along with other ones that they include in the report, must be noted that the information gathered by the mission team was in large part sourced from Israeli national institutions. This is due to the absence of UN entities operating in Israel, lack of cooperation by the state of Israel with relevant UN bodies with an investigative mandate. Nevertheless, the mission team took every step in line with UN methodology to mitigate issues of source reliability before drawing conclusions within the scope of this report. And Saagar, I want to just get your reaction to this initial piece about the limits of the report, the caveats that were put into it, and the fact that at the end of the day, much like, and this was the same thing that Anat Schwartz revealed in her, and the same thing that happened with the New York Times report, at the end of the day, they weren't able to really glean much other than what the Israeli authorities were telling them about what happened on that day.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem that they have is circumstantial evidence, quote unquote. That's really the thing that it relies on. That's just, I mean, imagine, would you convict somebody of rape in the United States on circumstantial evidence? Ask yourself how exactly that works. The reason this matters is, let's go back, is that if you talk to, and I've done this, if you talk to people who are in the wild, normal people who has their thoughts on the war, if they're pro-Israel, and number two, one and two things they're going to talk to you about is rape and beheaded babies. And it's like, that's why you have to scrutinize some of these claims. Think about it in the Ukrainian context too. If Ghost of Kyiv and Snake Island and all of that is real, then these are valiant warriors who are standing up and able to fight off the Russians. If it's a World War I style attrition thing on Bakhmut, well, maybe that's going to change the way that the average normie American is going to think about the battlefield. So these stories, these myths, these legends, how all of them, why and when we should litigate and be responsible around it, that's why it comes down to. So let's just lay that out there.
Yes.
For all of the, anti-Semitism and all these other ridiculous excuses. I would treat, by the way, if there was a, let's say, I think they have claimed this, mass sexual violence against Palestinians. Maybe, let's see. You have every incentive in the world to lie. Got to see some evidence, got to see some firsthand testimony, got to see some interviews, and all of that. I believe the report actually calls on the Israelis to allow that investigation also.
And the Israelis said no.
All right, well, there you go. All right. So my point, if we just come back to this, is I have not seen a shred of physical, real evidence about the claim of systematic use of rape as a weapon of war.
Yeah.
So my opinion, it probably just didn't happen. Maybe, we'll see. But based upon all of this, Sheryl Sandberg's involvement, and with the documentary, etc., they are trying to will this into existence to justify the emotional, guardrails that people can put up about the way that the war has been conducted. And I think we should call that like we see it. I don't have a particular dog or anything in that fight. I honestly don't even feel particularly passionate, about some of this. But it's like the evidence and everything that we've gone through, the debunking of the New York Times report itself in the UN.
Yeah.
The reason why all of the attention and all this focuses on this is because it is so emotively powerful, such to justify. And I would just say in general, whenever mass rape is used as a systematic weapon of war, you don't have to, have a report or whatever. You'll know. Because, look, and I pointed to what are the times in history? The sack of Germany by the Soviet army. I mean, we had literally millions of rapes that happened at that time. And you saw the physical evidence 9 months later. Then you saw the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where I believe it was almost 30%. When it was horrible, again, in what was happening. It was immediate. There was physical evidence. There was video evidence and all of this. The level of parsing and all of this that has happened, I'm not going to say nobody, was attacked. It would be, I think you've said this, it would be crazy if nobody was attacked.
Right.
Right? But in terms of the campaign that they are alleging, I don't think that happened. And I don't really know why they even have to do this, because 1,500 people or whatever were killed, or however many. I don't know what the actual number, 1,200, whatever the real number is, whatever it is, a lot of people who were innocents were slaughtered on that day for no reason. That's enough. And it should be. But,
absolutely.
they're the ones who are trying to make it into a thing, the media too in particular. So if they're going to play that game, then, we gotta parse every single claim too.
Yeah, and I would encourage people to actually read this report, because the media presentation of the report does not include a lot of the layers of caveats and limitations that we're laying out for you. Basically, what the report says, I mean, to echo what you said, I do find it extraordinary that at this point, if there actually was systematic rape, not some amount, but systematic rape as a weapon of war, that we don't have one single survivor. We don't have one single instance of forensic evidence at this point. I find that extraordinary. Israel is very interested in getting this story out. They've made a concerted PR effort. That's part of what that New York Times piece was all about. You had Anat Schwartz herself talking about how, pushing someone to cooperate with them in that reporting by saying this is important for Israeli Hasbara, in other words, propaganda. So this is a very important part of the narrative to the Israeli government. If they had this evidence to share with the UN, you can 100% bet that they would. Now, what the UN team here was able to look at and why their conclusion was that there are, quote, reasonable grounds based on circumstantial evidence to believe that conflict-related sexual violence occurred at several locations on October 7th. They were looking at, things like photographs of women who were unclothed from the waist down, things like that, which are suggestive but not conclusive. They also talk in this report about how some of the initial reports coming out from first responders and paramedics on the scene, the reason that they assumed that sexual assault must have occurred to whatever victim they were looking at is because they were untrained in some of the body's responses after death. That, leads to certain, these fencing positions, especially when fire is involved, that, can appear like the person was fending off some sort of assault, and other bodily changes that these paramedics were not, or whether they're paramedics or other volunteers or first responders, whoever they were not trained in understanding. So they misinterpret. That's something that they found here. Something I'm going to talk more about in a moment is they actually say that some of the rape allegations widely reported in the media, especially at Kibbutz Be'eri, turned out to be unfounded. Put a pin in that because that was one of the instances that the New York Times highlighted in their now undermined and debunked report. So let me go ahead and put up on the screen the next piece, which is a summation of their conclusions. So you can see what they did find and claim and what they did not. And again, they themselves admit this is all predominantly based on official Israeli government sources. So they say, based on the totality of information gathered from multiple and independent sources at different locations, there are reasonable grounds to believe that conflict-related sexual violence occurred at several locations across the Gaza periphery, including the form of rape and gang rape during the October 7, 2023 attacks. Credible circumstantial information, which may be indicative of some forms of sexual violence, including genital mutilation, sexualized torture, or cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, was also gathered. They were more definitive with regards to hostages because they were able to speak directly to some of the released hostages. This is a very small portion of the report, but they say with regards to the hostages, the mission team found clear and convincing information that some hostages taken to Gaza have been subjected to various forms of conflict-related sexual violence as reasonable grounds to believe such violence may be ongoing. This part is maybe the most significant conclusion or lack of conclusion in the report. It gets zero attention in the media whatsoever. But listen to this carefully. The mission team was unable to establish the prevalence of sexual violence and concludes that the overall magnitude, scope, and specific attribution of these violations require a fully fledged investigation. A comprehensive investigation would enable the information base to be expanded in locations which the mission team was not able to visit and to build the required trust with survivors, victims of conflict-related sexual violence who may be reluctant to come forward at this point. Now, the reason why this is so significant, Saagar, is because this speaks directly to the allegation, not that there were isolated instances of sexual violence, but that this was a systematic weapon of war. And they say they were unable to establish that. They were unable to establish it. So after all of the, the reporters who've been on the ground, all of the Israeli efforts to, create this narrative around systematic use of rape as, sexual violence in conflict on October 7th, this team was not able to establish that. And then the other part of the report that also got no attention from the media whatsoever was that they found that within the occupied Palestinian territory, the mission team received information from institutional and civil society sources, as well as through direct interviews about some forms of sexual violence against Palestinian men and women in detention settings during house raids and at checkpoints. By the way, there's already been UN investigations into that, but Israel has refused to cooperate. Israel rejects, they say, the report's call to investigate Palestinian claims regarding sexual violence by Israeli elements. So that is the sort of bottom line of what we got from this report. Just like I said, I would be very aware of the limits of this report as spelled out in the report itself. I'd be very aware of the fact that this continues to be primarily based on Israeli sources. I'd be aware of the fact that they say that they were unable to speak to a single victim. They had no forensic evidence, and they also were unable to determine that systematic rape happened on that day. And, so I would listen more closely to the report than the media characterization of what this report contains is what
also,
I would say
go
bottom
read
line.
it for yourself. It's free. You can literally go and read it anytime you want. Nothing that we're saying here is like cherry picked, as you said. You put a lot of effort into pulling all of the quotes. And if you want to go check the work, be my guest. There's a link right out there. You can Google UN report. You can read the full thing, etc. Because none of the stories that I even read that looked at even close to a job of what you just laid out, it makes sense. It takes a long time. How long was that? Maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes. That's welcome to nuance and the world that actual war that we have had to cover.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.